I think, Krithika, one of the things that we could probably do for the audience is talk a little bit more about the history. Maybe we should have gone into this at the beginning, but why the history, particularly the pivotal year 1979, when many people say, many historians of Saudi Arabia say that's the year that you went from a government that was using religion to spread its influence. King Faisal had been the first to really do that extensively. But then under King Khalid, after the Iranian Revolution and the occupation of the Grand Mosque in Mecca, you had a situation where they literally decided to be holier than thou. And one of the ways to do that was to export their vision of Islam. Is that a fair characterization of what happened?
I think 1979 was definitely a key year, but to me, I would even roll the clock back a tiny bit. To me, the key years start with 1938. That's when oil was discovered in Saudi. So just really quick, 1932, Saudi became a country. Ibn Saud, consolidated his country, third Saudi state. 38, oil was discovered. 65 is when King Faisal became the king, and he was the first globally minded monarch. So he's the first one who had this dream to have a foreign policy driven by Islamic solidarity. And he was operating in this kind of post-World War II, post-colonial world. There were all these new countries in Asia and Africa, and he really thought some of them, especially the Muslim majority ones, could become natural partners with Saudi Arabia. This also new country that was also the birthplace of Islam. So he was the first kind of globally minded Saudi monarch. And this whole campaign that we take for granted today was really of somewhat a recent vintage. And then 1973 is another key year. That was during the Arab-Israeli War, when the embargo really exploited their oil profits. So even though King Fahd had been cultivating contacts since 1965 in the developing world, 1973 is when he had this huge windfall in the kingdom that really enabled him to pump money into some of these new places like Indonesia and Nigeria. And then 1979, it's a key year for three reasons. First was the Iranian Revolution, as you mentioned. That struck fear into the heart of Saudi. It was not only a Shia revolution, which is the other sect that's not Sunni, which is what Saudi Arabia is. It was a popular revolution against the monarchy. So in two ways, it was very challenging to Saudis, and they really hated to see this spreading. And it did spread. They weren't just being paranoid. As I write in my book, the Iranian Revolution was received joyously by many people in the Muslim world, from Asia to Africa to Europe, where they were so inspired by this like popular Islamic revolt. They started translating all these books into their local languages. The intellectuals started going to Tehran. I mean, it was a really big sensational thing that happened before it became clear what kind of regime this was. Also in 1979 was Juhayman's revolt, when these this kind of like band of Saudi Islamists activists took over the mosque in Mecca and accused the monarchy of not being Islamic enough. So this thing happened outside Saudi Arabia, and this other thing happened inside Saudi Arabia that absolutely terrified the kingdom. And this takeover of the Grand Mosque in Mecca was harrowing, and it led to a lot of crackdowns inside the kingdom to make the kind of the Wahhabi ulama's desire more felt on day-to-day life. And then also by the end of 1979, Soviets invaded Afghanistan. So that was really a perfect storm. That's why, as Chris said, 1979 is the year that really kicked their project into high gear. They had the money for a while now, they had the ambitions, but now they had this really strong incentive and competitive desire to beat these other ideologies. So that's why 1979 was a big year. And it's not a coincidence that 1980 is when, for example, the Saudi University was built in Jakarta. 1980s was like the peak year for a lot of Saudi Dawah, when a lot of these things were being built.